Hi, welcome back. Professor McAllister here. Are you ready to get started learning about the reading strategies for the T's? Great. Okay. The number one most important tip is to read the question first. You must also read it carefully and you must read it completely. It is the most important part of the test. There'll be times you won't even have to look at the passage. For example, if you have a question that says, which of the following statements contains an opinion? You just look at your choices. Find the sentence that contains an opinion. A word like should, good, best, most, seemed. Those indicate opinions on the T's. You just mark it and then you move on to the next one. Unfortunately, most students begin by reading those very long passages first. I even had one student who actually took notes as she read, which is what good students do when you're in a class, not when you're trying to get through the T's. Okay? Read the question first. That way, if you have to refer back to the passage, you'll know what you're looking for and you can find it quickly and then move on. The second tip is to not leave any questions blank. After about a minute, if you're still not sure of the answer, you've probably at least narrowed it down to two choices, so you have a 50-50 chance. Guess and move on. You will not have time to go back, so do not leave it blank. And you know what? You can miss 11 questions on the reading section and still pass the T's. Okay. The third tip that I want to share with you is about primary sources. I can almost guarantee you there will be a question about a primary source on the T's. The main thing to remember about primary source is that it's the original source. You're not trying to determine whether or not it's an important document, significant. You're not trying to determine if it's true or false. On the T's, you only need to determine if it's an original source. Examples of primary source on the T's include photographs, diaries, letters, and eyewitness reports. So let's say, for example, you're outside and you happen to see someone run over a person on a bike. The police will come and you'll give them your statement. Because you're an eyewitness, you're a primary source. But when we read about this the next day in the newspaper, then that is a secondary source. And this is what you need to remember. If it appears in a newspaper on the T's, it will not be considered a primary source. For example, an obituary. For those of you who might not be familiar with obituaries, it's a notice of someone's passing. And for the purpose of the T's, it's in a newspaper. It'll include information about their birth, when they passed. It might tell the reason they passed. It'll list their survivors. It'll also list any information about memorial services or funeral services. But here's the trick. It's in a newspaper. Therefore, it is not a primary source. Another thing that confuses students is biographies. Students think biographies are primary sources. And I understand that. You're in a hurry to get through the test. You're nervous. And you see biography as a choice. And then you confuse it with autobiography. Don't do that on the T's. A biography is a written piece of work by someone other than the person the story is about. So, for example, if you were reading a biography of Abraham Lincoln, but it was written by Ronald White Jr. Lincoln didn't write it, so it's not a primary source. On the other hand, an autobiography would be considered a primary source. Auto means self. So, for example, if you had a book about Nelson Mandela, written by Nelson Mandela, that would be considered a primary source. So be very careful when you're in a hurry. Don't confuse biography with autobiography. A biography is not a primary source. An obituary is not a primary source. A newspaper article is not a primary source. But if you have a letter written from, say, a child to his mother while he's away at camp, missing the mother, that would be considered a primary source. Okay? Let's look back. What did we talk about today? First of all, the number one most important thing is to read the question first. And read it completely and read it carefully. The second thing we talked about is to not leave any questions blank. If you're not sure after about a minute, then guess and move on. Remember, you can miss 11 and pass. And that's all we care about is passing. Okay? Lastly, we talked about primary sources. They're tricky. But now you know to watch out for the tricks such as newspapers, obituaries, and biographies. They are not primary sources. Thank you for joining me today. On my next video, we're going to talk about the different kinds of passages: expository, persuasive, and narrative. I've got some good tips on those too. Thank you so much. I look forward to you joining me on the next video.